Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk about generative AI. My name is Michael Gibbs. I'm the founder and CEO of Go Cloud Careers, and we're going to talk about generative AI examples. We'll discuss some generative AI architectures. Of course, you've got David and me, so we'll definitely get into some cloud generative AI. Maybe we'll talk about how does generative AI work. We could talk about Amazon's generative AI, Microsoft's generative AI, and Google's generative AI. So it's going to be a really fun conversation. I'm here with me and also David Lithicum. You may know David. He's written many books on cloud computing and other technology things. He's an expert in the field. And I like to share the space with someone that's got that level of expertise to make all of you better in your career. So we're going to have a discussion. You can ask some questions. We're going to have a great time here. So we'll turn it over to Chris real quick. We've got some special events and some free things for you that he's going to talk about. Then we're going to have a great discussion and, of course, answer any of your questions.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. So welcome to Head in the Clouds, everybody. We are excited to be here, as always. I'm still recovering from the weekend at our conference here. Mike, I got to say, you should have kept the jersey on. When I saw Yvonne come up on that I'm cloud hired thing with his jersey, and I was like, I realized Mike took his jersey off. Mike got a jersey as a gift from a student at the conference this weekend. I got some maple syrup. I stole Alonzo's Canadian maple syrup that somebody gave him. So I'm going to be holding that hostage. I got me a Chuck Norris coffee mug from somebody. So it was a great weekend. I want to thank everybody that was able to join us there. So a couple of things coming up. Next Tuesday, we will not be doing Head in the Clouds, but instead of doing Head in the Clouds, we will be doing a cloud architecture design challenge. So anybody that's interested in trying their hands at designing a solution for a business case, sign up for that. It's completely free. It's going to replicate what some of our actual classes are like within our program. We're going to hyper condense the entire process from business case being presented, asking questions about the business case, and designing a solution all down into 2 hours. But it's going to be a fun time. And even if you don't think you're able to do it yet, just tune in and observe. See what it's like. See what it actually takes to design a solution. Again, that's a completely free opportunity for you. Make sure to sign up for that. And if you can't attend it all, sign up anyway, because you'll get a copy of the recording. Only people that sign up for it will get a recording. So no reason not to sign up. So in addition to that, we have our How to Get Your First Cloud Architect career guide. Or How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job Career Guide. Oh, sorry, too many words. I'm still exhausted. I'm recovering. So another free resource for you. Tyrone's got the link for all of these in the chat box for you. So make sure you get that. And yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. I want to see if Alonzo's got a few words, and then we'll leave it to Mike and David to have a great show. And Alonzo and I will sit back with some popcorn. So Alonzo, how are you? I feel like I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, you've seen me since yesterday, right? But you know what? I don't want to take too much time. I am always excited always to meet up with everyone and get all this insight from David Linthicum. I've been following David for a while, especially during my initial cloud journey and learning and getting all the information that he's compiled over the years. And now I'll get a chance to watch these two share their knowledge for the second time. I'm good to go, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they got to say about it.
All right, and I can't disappear too fast. I see Lohit is here.
Lohit,
check your emails. Check your emails, Lohit. I know you're busy. I know you're out there solving the world's problems as an architect. Check your emails from me. Anyway, all right. So, like I said, Alonzo and I are going to leave. We're going to let Mike and David have a good discussion here about generative AI and cloud computing, and we'll pop back in about halfway through the show to do some questions from everybody. So
awesome.
Mike and David, the floor is yours.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chris. So I'm really happy that David's here with us again. David has been in this industry for even longer than me. And that says a lot because I've been in this for 25 years. He's got a great new book out there, The Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. I am not a commissioned sales rep by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an excellent book. And it discusses the things that we deal with as cloud architects in a good reality term. So I can highly recommend this book for everyone. David and I are going to discuss generative AI. David, do you want to say anything before we begin?
No, it's great to be here, Mike. Appreciate you inviting me back for part two. I had a great time last time, and I'm looking forward to getting my knowledge on and going back and forth on some important concepts that are, I think, on everybody's mind as they're deploying cloud-based systems or, systems in general. I think there's an opportunity for us to take technology to the next level and have it as a true force multiplier for the business, but there's also the risk that we're going to do things wrong and have to go back and fix things and get rid of some technical debt. So we're at kind of the cusp of things right now. We got to figure out what the next steps are going to look like and how to do it properly and with the right set of skills.
Yeah, and I think that's you said it all. Do it right and with the right set of skills. So I'm going to kick it off with this. So, AI is not new. Artificial intelligence is not new. The first artificial intelligence systems I worked with were around 2001, and they were on Wall Street. They were pre-programmed algorithmic trades. If this, then this. And it worked really great until September 11th, 2001. And it lost a lot of money real fast. So we shut the systems down, got it working, and then that worked good until there was some other economic forces. How long have you been working with AI, David?
I worked with AI right out of college. In fact, I worked with it within college. So I was an M1 Enlist programmer with my first job. I was doing executive information systems and building things for the Department of the Army, wargaming, things like that. And it was fun to work with. It certainly was something that was new, but it was also becoming more accessible at the time. I think Borland had a expert system that they sold at any bookstore. I remember you get the DVD or CDs, and this probably back then it was 3.5-inch floppies. And people were very much interested in it. So there was a boom in interest in AI around that time. And it lasted for 3 or 4 years and just kind of petered out. And I think when you look back at it, the systems didn't really have a lot of the capabilities that we need like we have around today. And also it was just too expensive to run. Some of these systems that I would work on were $20 million in the door to buy your way into just running the system. And so the compute power and, where you're getting into more supercomputer stuff and very fast IO. So too expensive, really couldn't find the applications for it. And I don't think the AI stuff had the capability. But man, going back, you mentioned, people thought of AI at Dartmouth College back in the 50s. It's a concept that's been around for a long period of time. And certainly you've had science fiction, 2001: A Space Odyssey, with HAL the computer and, all this kind of thing. Everybody knew that this was coming. It was just a matter of evolving the technology to getting it right. So what you're seeing today is not necessarily a revolution. It's really nothing more but an evolution and building on different concepts that we built in the past. But they're really kind of built on a lot of work that was done over the last 30 years. And you participated in it, I participated in it, and we kind of have to look at that. So we're breaking some new ground here, but really it's building things on top of existing ground.
And it's interesting, David mentions the compute capacity. I put together the largest market maker on the NASDAQ and their trading system. There was basically a 100-meter long data center that was probably 100 meters wide, stacked from floor to ceiling with computers, these big Sun Microsystems refrigerators. David remembers them. And every other system that went out there on 3 floors. So we're talking about, basically, an incredible amount of space. I remember when the chief technology officer gave a presentation to the entire organization and he talked about it. We managed 10,000 servers. We managed this. And then he said, 4.2 terabytes of data. And I remember when he mentioned 4.2 terabytes of data, the entire room went silent because it was such a big amount of data. Now, we just hosted our Go Cloud Careers conference, and just from the video cameras, we took over a terabyte of data. So, that's really what we're talking about. The compute wasn't ready. One NVIDIA GPU now is more than those football fields worth of servers were.
Yeah, we're always counting on technology evolving and better. And so that's what's going to happen moving forward. So even the technology we have today, the amount of money we're paying for it, that's going to be deprecated in the next 5 years into something that's going to be more commoditized. So we should always expect that things are going to get better in terms of capacity, but we need to manage that capacity in terms of how much it costs us. I think that as people are moving into generative AI right now, they aren't necessarily aware of what things are going to cost. They're really data-oriented systems at the end of the day. They're widely distributed systems. You're a network person, you know how that works and the cost involved in doing that. And they leverage an inordinate amount of compute. And so your ability to access those assets, either buying them and bringing them in your own data center or leveraging them from a cloud provider, is going to be a little bit more expensive than I think everybody understands. So that gets into the fact that if it's going to be expensive, and our ability to optimize these systems becomes even more important. So architecture, design, picking the right components, and really kind of thinking through this stuff in a stepwise way, understanding that no longer can we do what we saw in 2022 and get these big cloud bills or these big managed service provider bills that we didn't expect because of some sort of under optimized system in the design. So this really is an opportunity for us to get things right initially out of the gate and get systems that are very efficient at using resources that are going to bring the most value back to the business, but use the least amount of money to do so. And I think that's really where the trade-off is right now. And I see a lot of excitement around generative AI, certainly in the cloud space. Probably not as many conversations as I think we need, like you and I have, in terms of the proper design approaches and looking at this stuff as a disciplined way to make sure we're leveraging these resources effectively. Nothing changes with that.
No, nothing. And it has to be business first. And I think that's where people get confused. They go and they take a certification. The certification talks tech, 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 with no mention of the business. And then they have like a framework that says, here's how to design the tech, which is great. Problem is, it doesn't solve any business problems. It's just tech. And if we don't address the business first, what business challenge are we trying to do? How do we want the business to operate in the future and then work backwards? We're not innovating. We're just creating a technical nightmare further down the road.
Yeah, and I think that's called technical debt, and we talked about that last time, and that becomes a big thing you have to mediate right now. I think enterprises are reeling from that. It's going to hold them back with their ability to kind of take their business to the next level. And so if you're in a hole, stop digging. And so if you have a lot of technical debt, it masses in the millions, maybe stuff you didn't do, it was done by your predecessor or your predecessor's predecessor. You need to manage those things and make sure we're moving into into an incrementally improving way of leveraging technology. So it's really kind of old problem, different decade, but many of the same kind of processes that were successful 10 years ago are really successful now. When you look at your ability to optimize systems and have a complete system design, and your ability to organize systems in certain ways and components, your ability to put things like volatility and domain, your ability to create scalable, database platforms, everything's bigger and everything may be a little bit cheaper in many instances, but the problems come down to your ability to look at the stuff and look at the business and figure out what the business needs and understand that our core metric of success is not our ability to use a hyperscaler and as quickly as we can and get as many applications out there as we can. It's not our ability to be the biggest honking database in the world. It's not our ability to get more net new generative AI systems out there. So we're the coolest kids on the block. We're there to really get as much value that we return to the business. Actually, it's returning equity to the shareholders, whoever those are, the owners, people who, and that really is our fiduciary responsibility as technologists. And that's often lost. And, normally when I mention that, people's eyes glaze over, they'll change the topic. They'll move on. It was something I probably didn't mention a lot, I think, in my younger years, because people wouldn't really consider it. But if we're going to be good architects, we're going to be good designers, we're going to be good operators, we're going to be good developers, that always has to be first and foremost in our mind. And I think that for some reason, it's probably fallen off the radar screen with many individuals out there that are making key systems decisions, key decisions around these systems we're building. And it's got to be put back on. And I think with the rise of FinOps, the ability to look at this stuff in more of a disciplined way, kind of return to accountability, I notice that's occurring now. That's probably a step in the right direction. So we can have these tactical ways of looking how people are burning and leveraging resources for the money that we're paying. But the reality is we also have to hold people accountable and have good metrics to measure how well these designs are working, either in production now, in other words, mistakes we may have made 5 years ago or somebody else normally made. And then moving forward, what are the different decision points and different decision paths that we can go, and which ones are going to provide the best value back to the business? No longer is this a guess. It should be Amazon, it should be Google, or it should be TensorFlow. It should be a configuration of technology based on our understanding of the technology, based on our metrics and our ability to determine success. That's going to not only build the most optimized configuration as close as we can get. It's never going to be 100% optimized, but we can also explain to the leadership how we're understanding how the value is going to come back to the business. And that's rarely something that can be done now. And I think with the rise of FinOps, the ability to kind of link different organizations together, the financial organization with the cloud organization, developers and operators, things like that, we're finally, I think, moving to a direction we're going to have this more productive means where we have a meeting of all these areas of disciplines where we're able to finally tell if we're doing things good or not. And I think in many instances, we can't tell.
Yeah, that not being able to know is a big problem. I remember I was a kid, practically. I was brand new to tech. And there were in one company that had 1,000 employees, 50 different applications that did the same thing. And we didn't even know about half of them until I ran a sniffer or a protocol analyzer on the network and said, what's this? Oh, yeah, we run that for our department to monitor this. I'm like, but this thing's supposed to monitor this. And so is this. Oh, yeah, none of them worked. And now I do believe we've gotten to the point where you've got, your enterprise architects and your cloud architects and your future architects are doing just business. What are these business requirements? Here's the thing. And then they have a separate department to implement, because the architects in today's world don't touch it. The tech, they can't build it, because if they do, they lose focus on the business. So I think it's getting better. When I started and you started, and when we were technical architects and we actually talked to the client and then touched the technology, we could never really focus because we were trying to do it all.
Yeah, and there was enterprise architects that really, I don't think really had the power in the business to make decisions. And so they were running on PowerPoint presentations, normally sitting in an ivory tower, and didn't have the influence that they needed to make things happen. So the line managers were the one that are making the tactical judgments and how the technology is going to be leveraged. It was very distributed, and that led to increased complexity. That led to people making mistakes. And I think that we can't return back to that. Not that we need centralized command and control, but we need to have centralized understanding of the objectives that we're working to. We have to approach this stuff as a team. I'm never trying to build an autocratic organization. I think that's counterproductive. But the ability to build a flat organization where everybody has a say into understanding where this stuff is going, and we're able to make a decision as a team to make sure we're making the right decisions. And so, like I said, as we're moving into generative AI, that's the biggest example of this right now. I'm communicating with lots of people every week that are already on the track to bringing generative AI in the systems. And they're not necessarily coordinating with the other people in the organization. They're working as a siloed team. And for whatever reason, sometimes it's politics involved, sometimes just the way the organizations are organized. And they're going to end up making a mistake, because I always tell them you need the input from the business leaders. You need the input from the person running the production plant. You need the input from the person who's driving sales transactions. You need input from a variety of people that are going to allow you to hit a very narrow target as to what this system needs to do. And right now we're kind of in this ready, fire, aim scenario again in many instances. And we do this around any kind of technology hype wave. And now we're in generative AI hype wave. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was a cloud hype wave. Prior to that, it was SOA hype wave, all these sorts of things. We can't lose sight of making that happen. And I think that people are probably understanding that more right now. I notice there's certainly a lot of interest in courses like you put together, where we understand the tactics and the technologies and the strategies behind doing enterprise architecture in general and making, core decisions. People are trying to learn and train themselves. So I think it's okay to bring up a point you had earlier to get certified in different technology spaces, but we have to have this cross understanding, or this holistic understanding of what this technology does and the ability to map this into the business. And that requires kind of a different breed of cat, so to speak, and how that's going to be done. So, I didn't go to business school. I don't have an MBA. I got computer science degrees just like everybody else. But the reality is we're going to have to figure it out. And I think that we're going to have some tools now to make that happen. So generative AI is certainly applicable in the FinOps world, and our ability to have better control and understanding about what all that data means and how we can improve it and make it happen. But the ability to have an open and honest discussion about where our current state is, where we need to go, and the obstacles it's going to take to move those to get there. And I think that's either going to happen now, or we're going to end up making, I think, the same mistakes we made 10 years ago, which is what we're paying for right now. If you look at the technical debt around there, certainly on the cloud computing stuff, we moved things into the cloud that should have never moved to the cloud, or when they moved to the cloud, they should have been refactored or changed to, leverage the different features of the cloud. Now people are paying for that. My concern is we may see that again in 5 years. I think we're definitely going to see it again in 5 years, but I just hope that we don't see it at the scale we saw in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to. I truly believe that was let's mass certify everybody. You can take as many free exam retakes as you want. And it was more of how do I turn you into a sales rep for my company than how do I train you to actually have a career? So I think we're probably it's not going to be as bad this time, but I still think it's going to happen.
Well, a question for you. I mean, obviously people are still focused on tactical certifications. They're going to be an AWS architect or a Google AI engineer or Microsoft security specialist, things like that, which trains you about a particular discipline, but it's focused on a particular technology set. Do you think that we're going to shift from that focus? And the reason people are doing that right now is because they can step right out of that certification and get a job based on having that certification. In other words, it gets them in the door but do you think we're going to get to more of a generalized understanding where we're building generalists, where people are going to be architects and people are going to have the business acumen to make decisions? I know you're having classes and things that make that happen, but is there just going to be this larger shift where instead of sitting in particular tactical classes, we're sitting in more general purpose classes and we're getting a more holistic understanding of what this technology does and the business aspects of it?
I think we have to. I know we do. And, the thing is, when I was younger, you could take the CCIE exam and get a job right afterwards. Now, granted, you worked hard for that CCIE. But, I interviewed before I started this company 1,000 AWS certified people. And I asked them what was a virtual machine, and they didn't know. I asked them what was BGP and how did it work, and they didn't know. I asked them, how would you design a container platform that would work across multiple clouds? And they didn't know. I would ask them, how do you secure a DMZ? And they didn't know. In fact, the only thing they knew was how to implement. And, for us, it was, let's examine all the components of the network, the data center, and the cloud, what it is, how do they work, and why do the companies use them? Then it was bring a business school education to the program. Then it was bringing executive presence and sales and emotional intelligence. And our people are at AWS, Azure, Google, Cisco, Deloitte, Accenture, KPMG, Capgemini, and they get hired feverishly at great jobs. So I think it has to change. Now, will it change? Probably not for a while, because the people that are teaching the majority of the classes have never had these roles in the first place. And they're teaching things that they don't know. And to really build it, what you need is somebody that did go to business school, somebody that didn't go to business school and focused on tech, somebody that focused on this in tech, someone that managed projects. And you need a big team to really build a real educational product that can train a whole career. So I think it's going to have to. But right now, I don't feel like the majority of it. I think the majority of it, here's your tech, here's your tech, here's your tech. And if you work as an admin for 10 years and an engineer for 10 years, maybe you can be an architect later. But I don't really believe that, learning how to keep the passengers in their seats in an airplane teaches you how to fly the plane. I think you got to train to fly the plane.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. I think that we are going to see a transition over time, but it's got to be demand created. So in other words, the hiring organizations need to ask for these particular skills, not necessarily certifications or even degrees, things like that, but they're getting to the point where they can measure and evaluate someone that's a continuous learner, is going to have a vast amount of knowledge. But, it's like when I hire people, certifications really don't matter to me. What matters to me is that you can keep up with what's going on. You can have a logical understanding of how to take this information and boil it down into something that's going to be useful, what you're doing on a day-to-day, and also figure things out pretty quickly. So if you get into a situation, you can figure out what it is and your past patterns and how they relate to the current patterns, things like that. And that's, in other words, teaching people how to think and think in a critical way. And that, I hope, is going to be more front and center. And I think more employers need to ask for those skills and those capabilities. Right now, it's very simple for them to ask for a certification, very simple for them to ask for a skill, with not understanding these better things. I saw a job posting today was for an enterprise architect, and then listed a series of, you had to make decisions based on your design capabilities, and then listed a set of technical skills that they wanted this enterprise architecture to have, with this hyperscaler and this type of security and things like that, but they're not getting it. You're not going to get a critical thinker. You're going to get someone who has that list of skills that can see them fit in the job. And you're going to have an enterprise architect who's going to continue digging the hole and building things with whatever technology they seem to know, because they don't have the skills in critical thinking, things like that. And the employers in this case weren't asking them the question. What they saw is they figured out that this is the way they wanted to go. They're getting people who understand those skills to get them further down the road, when no one's asking the question as to whether or not that's the best, most optimized way to make it happen. And the reality is that business could be losing, it could be $1 billion business that's losing $50 million a year in lost opportunities and under optimized systems, and paying more for resources than they have to, because a lot of these mistakes that are made. And, of course, you get to this thing that I hate. People is, well, it works. Yeah, it works, but it's 50 times more costly and 50 times more risky than a solution, an alternative solution out there. And I can't really show that to you because you went down the wrong path, and you're, keeping things running, but that really isn't a metric of success. Your ability to, in essence, keep this thing adding value back to the business, be able to prove it is going to add value back to the business, is how you determine success. And people really don't get that concept right now. And so, I talk about this in the book, and I rant about it on my InfoWorld blog all the time. And I think I get a certain number of people who get it, who will, kind of use as an echo chamber and read that. But you need to get out to a wider audience, so we understand that this is the way going forward. We understand that we need these types of people that are probably different people that we're looking for right now. We need to be able to write these job descriptions to attract these types of people. And we need to have people in the organization that can vet these types of people to make sure we're building the talent to bring things forward. Now, you do see organizations that are kind of on the innovative edge, where they are hiring those people and they are defining it. And I think that there's a small minority, but the reality is they figured it out. And by the way, they're the ones that are creating creative technology. They're the ones creating unique and novel supply chain integration techniques, leveraging different technologies, the ability to create huge distributed systems, the ability to create better customer experiences, because they're not focused on the tactics of the technology. They're focused on the people who have the creative and innovative forethought to create and design these systems in a way that's going to create the business. It's not the business and actually creating itself around the technology. That's never the right way to take it.
Yeah, that's the tail wagging the dog, and I've seen too much of it as of you. And yes, there are places like Cisco had a business solutions group, and Microsoft had a business solutions group, where they went so far as to hire industry experts and verticals, and then say, here, work with our teams to make sure they were there. I love that. I was part of it at Cisco. And I could see the difference there. And then we worked with the sales teams. And the sales teams are compensated on what they could sell. So they're going to try and sell, and it's not their fault. And any company is going to try and sell. And that's why, Microsoft, at least, and Cisco had that business solutions group where, they brought in medical professionals like me to be in their medical group. So we could just say, here's what I do as a doctor. Here's what I do as a nurse. Here's the patient journey, for example. And that way, but they weren't just proposing technology because it was cool and would damage things. So, what are the main components, David, of the generative AI architecture?
Well, it's going to be mostly data, really. At the end of the day, it's the ability to learn doing unsupervised training that comes from massive amounts of data that is able to go through. And one of the reasons generative AI is so helpful these days is because it got the mother of all databases, being the internet, the World Wide Webs, and all the content that's out there, to train itself on a variety of different topics and skill levels and things like that. So the ability to have information, wide information that's out on the web, but also information and data that is about your business, sales transactions, sales order record information, productivity information, production information, things like that, and have it be able to train from that data is really what's core to any AI system, specifically generative AI systems, because it needs a massive amount of information so it can create these unique and novel solutions. The idea with generative AI, it's going to build something net new from the stuff. That's why we use it to build images and write thank you notes, and so we don't have these sets of pre-built processes and logic we have to make it happen. So core to do sound architecture around generative AI is to figure out how you're going to manage massive amounts of data and what your strategy is going to be to manage massive amounts of data. And of course, you got people thinking in data warehouse terms where they're trying to migrate all that stuff to a centralized location. I'm not sure that's the best path for generative AI training data and learning. It's about leveraging the data where it exists, which could be as many as 1,000 different organizations in different physical formats. It could be a massive amount of PDF files. It could be, some internal web pages, and it could be, databases that go back 30 years. And ingest this information in some sort of a meaningful way, we can come up with the answers that we ask the thing to. So the other aspect of it is we have a tremendous amount of compute that has to occur. So we're going to ingest this massive amount of data, and we're going to get these complex questions that are asked. They could be, 20 different nested things that we need at our prompts. Then you have to be able to support the compute for those systems. Of course, people are looking at, we use, GPUs and TPUs and things like that, how you architect and design. And the other thing is you need the networks to support them. If you're leveraging the data where it exists, the network has to be strong, whether it's moving out to a cloud-based system or into your internal-based systems, or it's leveraging information from a supplier, which happens a ton. So we have a very complex database architecture that needs to be dealt with in the beginning as we ingest information. We have complex compute and overwhelmingly scalable compute systems that have to be there in the middle. And then the other thing is we have to have some sort of an output management system. If we're taking the output of these systems, once we ask the questions, once we get the queries out of the thing, the results of that needs to be stored in some sort of a useful way. With, by the way, in many instances, we're going to ask the same question over and over again. So we have a cache of responses that comes up. So if we ask the same question, that response will basically come up as quickly as we can. So there has to be some sort of design in making that happen. The core thing in all this is that you can't leave the architectural disciplines of the past. There's not a lot of stuff here that's net new. We have a complex database problem to solve. We know how to solve that. We have a high scalability compute problem to solve. We know how to solve that. And we have an output problem to solve, and we kind of know how to solve that. The other thing to think about is different dimensions of security and governance. You got to remember, you can take I always screw that up, ambiguous data that may have no meaning unto itself. It doesn't have any PII information. It's anonymized. But we can take that anonymized information and turn it into PII information by running it through a generative AI system, because it's able to find patterns, come up with matches, and figure out probabilities that this information is assigned to this particular individual or this particular company, things like that. Well, suddenly that data has transferred from something that probably doesn't need to be protected or not protected to the same degree as PII information into personally identifiable information that has lots of laws and regulations around it. And so already we're running into situations where people are getting information out of these systems that they didn't think they'd get, and they didn't have the protection in place to make sure that they're outputting data that needed to be protected. The ability to figure out, salaries and locations and logistics, and just a wealth of stuff that pop out of this. So security needs to be architected in every step of the way. You got to remember, we're leveraging the data where it is. In many instances, some of those things are undersecured or not secured, and so we have to figure out some sort of way to secure them as we're ingesting information from these various databases. The compute systems have to be secured because they're, in essence, they're information in flight. And then the output is the most important thing, because we're deriving information out of that we didn't think we'd get. And so we have compliance issues, we have legal issues, we have privacy issues, and we have ethics issues to consider in how they're run. The other thing is just an aspect of this, the whole ethical thing of dealing with AI-based systems that are making core decisions in our life. Where we just had a lawsuit that occurred, and you can Google away for this, where, someone was able to successfully sue a company because they figured out age discrimination was occurring because the AI system that was selecting the resumes was underutilizing people who are over a certain age. And it wasn't the fault of the company. They just said the algorithm was doing that, and they had certain biases that were built in based on whatever reason. And by the way, it could have gone the other way. It could have been is discriminating against younger people and different races and things like that. We have to be cognizant of that as we're designing these systems. So we have to have these checks that occur as we're processing the information, relying on this information, that we're not taking this information as gospel. And there has to be some checks that occur around that. In many instances, what I will do if you build a generative AI system is I'll have a second generative AI system, which will be built just to look at the results of this various thing, to look for those biases. And there's certain products that are starting to emerge right now to do this. And I think that's a great thing. And your ability to automate your ability to get the answers you need, but then look for problematic things that comes out with those results. And PI information needs to be secured, bias data, under-selecting, over-selecting a particular group of people, or even bias data that comes around managing supply chains, or we're buying from a particular supplier because of something that the generative AI came up to a conclusion, which is going to get us in trouble because it may not know all the dimensions in the place. With that company may have maybe veteran owned, and therefore should receive a certain amount of the business, and all these sorts of things. So getting this point where we got a chainsaw. We pretty much know how to build the systems using this stuff, but it can do a lot of damage and it can do a lot of good if put in the right hands. My concern right now is that we have a tendency to go too fast into these areas. And we talked about this last time we were on the show. $20 billion with a B in marketing that's out there telling people to get on this bandwagon as quickly as they can. And they're listening. They're starting to move in those directions. They're starting to ramp up their generative AI stuff. It's coming from the board of directors. The investors want to know what's going on with their generative AI studies. You have to kind of take a breath and understand that there has to be a lot of very careful planning that occurs as you start moving in this direction. And by the way, I'm not talking about paralysis by analysis. I'm talking about just doing the rudimentary planning to ask the questions that will get you to a point where we understand what the business issues are. Just points that we just made 20 minutes ago. What business issues are you need to consider, and how that maps back in to some sort of an architecture. In this case, how it maps back into generative AI. We don't have a lot of people around that understand how this stuff works. I mean, we have AI analysts and deep learning and machine learning analysts. Generative AI is a little different in how you build these systems. So we're short of talent. We're not thinking it like architects in some of the instances of time. There's lots of booby traps in this thing that can get us in trouble, including overspending on resources and getting us into compliance danger and security issues, things like that. So my advice to folks who are moving in this direction, understand how the architecture works, learn from people who are doing this, and then make sure you take a beat and that the planning is occurring. So you're getting to a point where you're relatively sure that when you build and roll out these systems, they're going to have value that comes back to the business. There's also a reason for you to build these systems. In other words, there's a business use case that we can map back to. It's not good enough just saying, well, we throw I was in a meeting last week where people said generative AI 3 times, and no one, I guarantee no one in the meeting know what they were talking about. And the reality is that has a tendency to be a hype-driven comment that people are using all the time, very much like cloud computing was in 2010. People say cloud computing to answer everything. Well, it's not generative AI as the answer for everything, just like cloud computing is not an answer for everything. And it comes down to careful planning. And I hate to say the thing that people hate consultants saying, but it depends on a lot of stuff that we have to understand, and you have to take time to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting, David. You bring this up. I'm going to go back to an architecture I worked on about 15 years ago. It was an extremely high-profile architecture for a bank, and I was an architect on the team, and there were a bunch of engineers on the team. I love engineers; they're super smart people that bring my designs to life. And there's architects we design. I spent 3 months at the customer site. Each day, I walked around. I talked to leadership. I talked to other key stakeholders. I talked to employees. I watched people work. I found all kinds of challenges. I took them for sushi every day. I took them drinking almost every night. And after 3 months, I understood that bank so well. Then we actually gave them a design. They were like, yeah, I love this. But it took me 3 months just to figure out what that bank actually needed, because anything I would have designed before that would have been wrong.
Yeah, and they probably didn't know what they needed. And so
Yeah.
it took you to get in there and ask the right questions. And by the way, it's not unusual. In many instances, people, even the owners of the systems, don't really understand where the business is going and what requirements need to be dealt with. So that's not unusual. But it's good you were there, understanding what the requirements were, and you're able to dictate them back to the customer, and they're able to get some value out of the work you guys were doing. That doesn't happen a lot.
No, and it's funny. The conversations with the engineers are, what are you doing over there? Why are you just taking people to lunch? And I'm like, I don't, they're like, I can build it for you right now. I'm like, but what are you going to build? It's just call managers and phones and things. I'm like, no, this is going to affect how this person works, how this person works, how this person works. We need to, how they need to work best, and then find our technology. In fact, I'm noticing a very scary trend. And the scary trend is, here's how you learned architecture. You read other people's engineering documents and see what they've deployed and just do the same thing. And it's like, well, the doctor may have prescribed low pressure for this patient because it was right for them. And they may have prescribed an ACE inhibitor, which is another blood pressure drug, for a different patient because they have different conditions. And that's the key. It's the why that I think we're both talking about. That, and I'm doing it because I want them to hear it from you, that it's the why matters more than the how from the system design perspective. The how can be figured out later.
Yeah, the how can always be done. I always tell people, with enough money and time, I can do anything you want with technology. That's the easiest problem to solve. The hardest thing is to figure out, what needs to be built and why it needs to be built, and who needs to build it and how it's going to work within the business. And that's a question you have to answer. And it's a hard question, to be honest with you, because in many instances, even people that you deal with in the business may not understand that. And so you have to get in there and ask a lot of questions that they may not be willing to answer. And in some instances, the way politics may work and the culture may work, you may get pushed out of the conversation because they don't want people asking those questions, or they want to go in a particular direction. They don't want people to tell them that the hyperscaler that they picked 2 years ago is the wrong way to go, and it's completely under optimized for what you're looking to do. And by the way, the generative AI system you just mapped out and put $10 million into building isn't really solving a problem, and you're over engineering something that could have been done with other things. And by the way, this other thing, it needed generative AI that you pushed off because you wanted to spend money on this, is probably something which should have been moved up priority stage. So it comes down to, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It really comes down to having a strong leadership and people who are able to manage the organization, but also manage the culture, and do so with a little bit more of a hands-on take of this. So, and I understand the thing is, I've held positions in companies where I hire lieutenants, and they basically will go off and do something, and I may check on what they're doing, I may not. Well, the reality is, I think that the CIOs and the CTOs in these large organizations need to have a very interactive relationship with all of these various projects, so they can understand in lots of detail. They don't have to get down into the engineering aspects of it and understand the difference between two different databases on cloud providers, but what's going on and how this thing is solving the business, and putting the metrics in place so they can prove to their bosses and boards of directors and investors that this is actually happening. And that becomes part of the architecture. I always tell, it's not just a business case. People will write use cases and things like that, but your ability to, in essence, create a scorecard and then fill out the scorecard to define what success is going to look like. And people say, how can you define success? We don't know what we're looking to build. Exactly. You got to know what you're looking to build to figure out how you're going to define success, and figure out what metrics are going to come back to the business. And that's it. It's a tough thing to do. And we had kind of a good base of that, I think, back in the 90s. I remember the structured analysis and design that Gaines and Sarson and Jordan DeMarco and all these different design methodologies that are out there kind of force people to think through a lot of these things and use cases and business case of these things. That's kind of a lost art now. People in doing the agility, doing the agile stuff, I think is perfectly fine. They're skipping a lot of things that may need for them to slow down before they go faster. And I don't think it's a useful thing to skip it. And of course, we sound like a broken record in making this happen, but it comes down from your leadership. And so I would go into the CIO's office, the CEO's office, the CTO's office, whomever has the influence, and tell them that they have to get in there, change the culture, make sure you're asking the questions, and make sure you're getting the conclusion that you need. In many instances, that may not be a possibility. They don't want to hear it. They want to continue on and doing their job and having lieutenant stuff, and everybody's making decentralized decisions and chasing after whatever hype monster is coming down the line. This time is generative AI, and not necessarily getting to the business outcomes that they're looking for. Again, they're going to get to an outcome that works, but it's going to be incredibly under optimized. It's going to be incredibly expensive. It's going to remove a lot of value from the business, of adding value to the business. And that's not what you want. So there has to be a change, I think, in leadership's expectations, a change in many cultures, a change in how people learn, and also a change, I think, in how people think. I think everybody's waiting for generative AI to do this stuff for them. It's never going to happen. That's a creative process that a human being has to participate in. We can certainly leverage that technology and certainly leverage the tactical tools to make it better in doing network design and database design, things like that, having it check after us. But that becomes the single most critical thing I think businesses need to do to approach their business today. And it's going to set businesses apart from their competition. It's going to give them a leg up, and it's going to allow them to be a business that other businesses can't beat. So where do you want to be? You want to be a business that's able to leverage technology as a true force multiplier for the business, that's able to differentiate yourself in a marketplace where things are commoditizing pretty quickly. If you look, one of the aspects of generative AI is everybody's going to be able to produce things in the same way and process information in the same way. How are you going to be different? What are you going to do? It's going to be creative and innovation to make that happen. And to be creative and innovative, you need to leverage technology as a weapon. And people hate when I use that term, but I think you're weaponizing the technology for the aspects of the business. And that really should be the focus right now. In many instances, it's not. Some companies it is. That comes down to cultural change, leadership changes, and that comes from the top. People own the company and invest in the company, need to be demanding that that kind of culture exists.
Yeah, and I'll get into something else, but yeah, that's exactly the case. You know, when I was younger and went to business school, we read The Art of War, great military strategy book, and they taught it to all MBA students for a while. How will you beat the competition? And you know, now I find ourselves sort of in the same kind of place. You know, AI is a tool, weapon, whatever you want to call it. He will use it to provide the best customer service, the best product development, to pull costs out of the equation, or something that gives them a competitive advantage. So I'm with you. So David, whether it's Google generative AI or Microsoft generative AI or Amazon generative AI, or you buy a bunch of H100s from NVIDIA, stick them in a server and build your own generative AI, how does generative AI work?
Yeah, generative AI is able to build net new responses based on examining data and not necessarily patterns in data. So it can ingest a huge amount of data that we just talked and figure out ways in which that data can be analyzed and looked at. So once the information exists and the training has occurred, it understands different aspects of what the meaning of that data is, and we're able to have a conversation with the generative AI using the LLMs, large language models, and ask it in a way that we would ask another human being, and in very simple and complex instructions that it's able to take and then build an answer based on what we're looking to answer. So it really is the foundational part of what AI was and what AI has always been trying to be. They've always been, and by the way, generative AI is nothing new. It's been around for, as research for a long time. And your ability to generate new responses out of it looking at any amount of data and any type of data, and the ability to determine logical operators and outcomes and derive patterns around that without you having to get in there and say, look for this pattern, look for this outcome, look for this way of it, and look at the data in this way. It's unsupervised, so therefore it's hands off. So that's why people are excited about it, because they can get a lot of cool information out of it based on the fact, and just by talking to it, like we talked to the chat box, to the digital assistants in our houses. So it becomes another way to leverage the AI capabilities, which is a lot more flexible and a lot more productive than the traditional ways of leveraging machine learning, deep learning, and traditional AI, like when I was doing M1 and Lisp. So it has many patterns that are the same as traditional AI, but the new stuff would be that it doesn't necessarily need to have instructions to take a guess at what you're, I wouldn't say a guess, but to understand what you likely need. And it's able to even change its understanding of what your needs are based on its learning patterns that it's learning from you as a human being. We all know that from our chat digital assistants. They can, even though we may say a word wrong, they'll pick up on the fact that we know we need the word anyway, and that's a learning process that went along. But the backend system is able to pull the information up that it needs. So it's the ability to get at lots of information very quickly, organize the information in certain ways based on how it derives it. It's the ability to communicate with these very complex things with very simple ways, because we're using language like I'm talking to you right now. And therefore, becomes our ability to create the prompts that we need to get the information out of it that we need. And so in building some of these generative AI systems, it's not only just building the massive amounts of training data, but the ability to communicate with this generative AI engine in such a way that it's going to have the productive means that we need to get out of it. So people need to understand how to ask the questions and how to get it there. So that was a long rambling answer, but also I did notice out that it depends on who you talk to, you get different definitions of what it is, but that's really kind of the academic definition.
And I like that. And that's kind of a perfect way to do it. We'll probably go to questions in a few minutes. I see generative AI doing a lot of the software engineering that's being done today at some point in the future. I mean, and I see it, if it's combined with robotics, doing some manual labor too, specifically in types of work that are hard to find people.
Yeah, and I think that's great. The computers should be things that enhance our lives and remove us from having to do these mundane tasks, mowing the lawn, things like that. A generative AI system can analyze, take a satellite image and figure out the geolocations and figure out the best path and the most optimized way to mow the lawn based on information that it already has. And so I'd rather have it mow the lawn than me mow the lawn. But, also things like, writing outlines for papers, the ability to look at your other information, also the ability to come up with aspects of information that you may not have thought of. So it helps you be creative because you can round out a lot of the answers. You got to remember, it's just repeating stuff it already heard. They're not building net new stuff. It's generating a new response, but that's based on somebody else's ideas and IP, and certainly with Chat GTP, things like that. So it has the potential, and we're seeing this potential now, to automate a lot of things that are typically jobs that people don't want to do. So people are talking about being displaced by generative AI systems with the autonomous driving and auto delivery systems, things like that. There's plenty other things for those people to do. Yeah. And if we have a way to do it in a better way, then that's really the progression of the industry. You got to remember, we go through this about every 30, 40 years. The advent of computers, the advent of automobiles, the advent of automated farming equipment, and they displace other people, but we always end up in a better place, and humanity's a bit better from leveraging this technology. Hopefully generative AI is going to basically do the same thing. Hopefully it doesn't rise up and try to kill us, but it has potential of being more value than anything else.
Yeah, and that's the key. And I saw the Terminator movies back in the 80s too. And, in some cases it's a little bit scary, but, anything that enhances our productivity enhances our standard of living. If productivity goes down, standard of living goes down. Productivity goes up, standard of living goes up. So I do think it's exciting. I just think a lot of us are going to have to work really hard to make sure we're relevant. I mean, AI can't replace a cloud architect. It can't replace an enterprise architect. It can't replace an AI architect, because who's going to design it? Who's going to get the business requirements? Who's going to find out from the stakeholders? Who's going to sell it? Who's going to negotiate it? So, architects are safe, but I do have concerns that it will displace many of the rudimentary level engineers,
and I think
basic programmers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it'll back up a lot of the decisions, like I said, lawyers are making. It'll analyze legal arguments and determine if something is correct or not, and also bring up precedents, things that we're missing. So it allows us to do things in a better way than we've done in the past. It allows doctors to have their diagnostics checked to make sure that we're not missing something, we're not getting some sort of an allergy or reverse trend, and able to see something. By the way, with this particular person, this particular genetic profile, chances are they're going to have this allergy, and therefore this should be checked. So it's going to allow us to be healthier. It's not necessarily displacing doctors.
No.
It allows them to do their jobs better. There will be people who are, factory workers in some instances, people who drive things. I think the autonomous driving is a real thing, even though we're not seeing it come on as fast as we would like. Automated trucks that are able to drive themselves around the country, and therefore to places a career path there. So that's going to be an outfall for this, and we need to figure something that we do the right things about these people who are displaced from the jobs. However, it's going to, I think, make things better. It's not doing something that only human beings can do. It's just basically augmenting what we're able to do. And you just mentioned a great, example would be development and the ability to generate code. We had code generators for a long period of time. They just generate crappy code. Now they can generate better code. And by the way, get better over time as it learns and its training and different stimulus occurs with the whole unsupervised learning of generative AI. I never want to start a program from scratch. I'm always going to take existing code. If something can generate and get it better, that's going to make my job easier. That doesn't mean the developers are going to go away. That just means they're going to get further down the path in a faster period of time with better tools to make things happen. The ability to design databases, the ability to, even look at network designs and even system designs just to make sure we're not missing something we need to get into is something that's going to augment our ability to be architects. But always that creativity needs to occur. And you got to remember that generative AI is nothing more but a mirror to ourselves. It's just reflecting what somebody else has already said. It allows us to get the information very quickly in some sort of an automated way. And I think that's just fine. And we're going to adapt to it, and we're going to be perfectly fine as human beings and hopefully be better off.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that every technology we change. I mean, I remember when the fax machine came out, and that changed everything. And then email came out, and that was an even new iteration of the same thing. And then, but yeah, it's not going to go away. It's just going to change.
Yeah, and it's going to be something else in 5 years. And so the devices and things like that are going to augment over time. Ubiquitous computing, the ability to deal with systems in very different ways. That's going to evolve over time, and I think it's going to leave us in a better place. It's definitely making things cheaper, faster, and better. It hasn't gone the other direction. Some things have gotten more expensive. For the most part, compute, storage, devices, all these things have become cheaper, faster, better, and more available to people who once couldn't afford the technology. And I think we are going to see a revolution. We're going to see a lot of third world countries that are going to become second and first world countries because they're able to leverage technology that they didn't have access to. And do so in a way that's going to make them more productive and participate in the economies in a much more productive way. We already saw that rural areas in the United States of America, like Appalachia, when they brought in the internet, suddenly household incomes doubled, in 3-4 years. And that's because people were able to parlay that resource into something that allowed them to learn faster, allowed them to work remotely, allowed them to set up online businesses and things that didn't exist prior. And so they completely changed the demographics and the economy in those areas that were, depressed for the last 50 years since the coal mine shut down. And so a lot of those opportunities are going to stop popping up where the technology is able to do a lot more good than harm. And for the harm stuff, we just need to be able to look at it. Believe me, we're going to make some mistakes, and some people are going to get hurt and displaced and things like that. We just have to make sure we do the right things to minimize those things and manage them as best we can. I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to benefit from this.
Yeah, and I do too. I'm thinking of all those MRIs I used to read before I moved into tech a long time ago. And I'm looking at an MRI and I'm like, well, this could be something. It might not be something. Hey, what do you think? Well, I don't see that, but I see this thing over here, which could be something or not be something. At least if you've got something that gets you halfway there, and you can look at it and say, I agree or I disagree. Yeah, that's serious decision support. And the more technology we have, the bigger our problems get because we're trying to do more with the same or less resources. So we need more and more and more analysis.
Yeah, and it's in that case, it's a good instance where it's backing up your diagnostics with something where it's trying to find patterns, and it's also pointing things out that you need to pay attention to as a human. And so the more that can happen, the better off you're going to be. Human beings, we're very good at deep analytics and being creative and innovative. We're not very good at doing repeatable things over and over again, and even looking at detail in many instances. So something that can find the detail for us, fill in the missing pieces. That's going to be a direct benefit to us, and it's going to be applicable in everywhere, and like we're seeing right now. Sometimes I think it's a little silly in what we're trying to do with it, but I think we're going to have to go through the silliness before we get to the actual productivity.
I think we've always gone through the silliness. I won't go down the statistics, but I know you remember the days where internet traffic and what it used to be.
Yeah.
And when the internet service providers were looking around, these big expensive bandwidth pipes that I'm buying, and it's all used 80% on this nonsense. So yeah, we started with goofiness for the internet. Now it turned into, how we run our markets. And only about 40 or 50% of the internet bandwidth is probably goofiness now.
Yeah, it is, but it becomes kind of a lifeline or a pipeline where we kind of exist and all interact one to another. And I think we're better off for it. I mean, there's some downsides to it. People can be addicted to devices and, overly absorbed with online things, mental health issues, things like that. You have to balance your life, but for the most part, we live in a better world and everybody's more affluent because of the internet, our ability to buy things and sell things and have careers and learn and train by having this interaction with information and interaction with all kinds of other human beings. I mean, back in the olden days, you didn't leave the town you were in. And so now you have the ability to have a massive amount of information available to you to make the right decisions and do the right things as you grow as a human being. So I think that's a good evolution of stuff, but it's probably going to get better. We're going to do some dumb stuff with it, and I'm sure we're going to have to go through some legal wrangling with the IP and stuff around generative AI, because again, it got the information from someplace. And normally someone created the information, so they may have rights to that information. So we have to figure out how to manage that. But at the end of the day, people are able to do things faster, better. Businesses are able to capitalize on it to deal with automated supply chains and better productivity systems and the ability to manage human beings in a better way. And also, I think maybe even be fair about that. So, and we put value where the value should be put, our ability to be innovative and creative with the technology. As we start automating a lot of these more mundane tasks and routine tasks, that becomes something, it becomes a skill that's going to be more valued because we're going to see the value that comes from this just because everything else is taken care of.
Totally agree with you. I suspect there's a whole lot of questions piling up. Chris or Tyrone, are there a lot of questions we need to get to? Looks Chris is happy there with something more fun. Chris is out eating popcorn, watching the movie.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay, Chris.
Yeah,
we have a lot of questions there.
I'm sure we got plenty of questions. You kind of caught me off guard there. I was enjoying that a little too much. Had gotten my popcorn about 10 minutes into you guys. I was like, this. I even sent Alonzo a message. I was like, where's that message I sent? I said I could sit back and listen to this all day. That's about the time that I got my popcorn.
Dropping some real gems down here.
Tyrone messaged me and said he had a lot of questions, so I was thinking we better get to some.
All right, so I just want to. I'll start it off with this question since I'm apparently slacking on my job here. I got to go collect all the questions. But so for somebody like me that before the past hour didn't really understand the concept of generative AI. What, for me, simple guy, just going around doing my thing, walking down the street, going to the Walmart. What is generative AI? What does it mean for me? Like what, or even if I've just got a small, just an everyday business, is it?
Yeah, it's something you can interact with as a human being when you interact with it. So it's very analogous to you dealing with another human being that has a large degree of intelligence, and tell that human being, in this case, a generative AI system, to go off and carry out certain tasks based on the way in which you instruct it. So the difference would be versus traditional AI is that normally had to be supervised. It was very structured in how we dealt with it, certainly machine learning, and deep learning algorithms, where generative AI creates things that are net new. And so we can ask it to do something and we can give it a task and it's able to create something that's going to be unique and new and novel out of that, even guessing about and even having an innovative simulation as to what you may need out of the request you just made. So that's why we can ask it to generate a picture of a dog driving a truck, and by the way, make the dog a golden retriever, and by the way, make the truck a Ford F-150, and by the way, make him driving in the desert. And it'll carry those things out, which are all net new, but basically it goes to the back to determine to add a massive amounts of information to determine what that request is likely to mean. In many instances, it may take a guess at it, but the thing is, we like dealing with other human beings that are able to read between the lines, and generative AI has a capability of reading between the lines.
All right, that makes sense to me. All right, I can follow that one. So, so here's a question from Gabriel, and I guess it would be for both of you. Why are companies going back to on-prem?
Well, I guess I'll start and then go to David. Many people went to the cloud for the wrong reasons. And they didn't really evaluate what their workloads were, what they were trying to do, and they had no idea what the cost of the cloud was actually going to be. We evaluated the AWS cloud versus our own private cloud. AWS wanted $11,000 a month for our lab environment, and we bought all the servers for $10,000. So we paid less one time than AWS would have wanted on a monthly basis for our particular use case, because we needed everybody to have a certain amount of storage, a certain number of CPU cores. And when we looked at cores and storage so that our people could build OpenStack clouds, it was far cheaper in the data center. But it depends how they went to cloud. And then David can talk about ways to move to the cloud where it makes more sense, because I think it's better for him to describe that. But the cloud could be more expensive. It could be 2 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive, or it could be cheaper based upon how the organization is using its compute resources and what they need and how they architected it. But to me, it feels like most people went to the cloud willy-nilly. I got to be on the cloud, and EC2 is exciting. They didn't know that they had EC2 running in their data center for the last 20 years, for 25 years from VMware. But it was something exciting. They went there and they just paid 2 to 3 times more than it cost. That's my perception from the people I've.
I think you're spot on, Mike. I think what happened was that people moved to the cloud for the wrong reasons, and the cloud either stayed the same in terms of cost or got more expensive. And here we are in 2023. Suddenly, the price of hardware that we would put in a data center, and Mike had a great use case for that, is a lot cheaper than it was 10 years ago. So suddenly, the business case for moving something on-prem, certainly if you're doing simple things like massive data storage and simple compute things, you don't need a lot of cloud services around to make that happen, is going to be a cheaper option for many of the enterprises that move things into the cloud. And by the way, they failed to change those applications, so they took advantage of the cloud. They just put them on a platform analog that they found in the cloud. There wasn't a lot of management of those systems, and so they turned out to be money hogs. And in 2022, we saw lots of these systems that were getting highlighted as something that enterprises had that was about 2.5 times what the expense they thought they were going to be. So tough decisions were made, and businesses need to leverage the systems they're able to provide them next value. That doesn't mean that everything moves off the cloud back to on-premise. Just only a certain systems where they doesn't make sense to put them there, and they're more economical to leave on to bring back on-premise. But it means that we're looking at the stuff with a much more suspicious eye, and then making sure we're putting the applications on the right platforms that are, again, going to produce the best value for the business.
And that reminds me of your cautioning earlier. I don't remember exactly what you said, but cautioning, you're hoping that what happened with cloud computing doesn't happen with generative AI, that everybody's just like, yeah, generative AI, sure. That's going to be that's going to solve everything. Because then 10 years from now, we'll be in the same situation with the different.
Yeah, you can count on it. Because people are going to make decisions for the wrong reasons. People have a chance to manage by magazine. They chase the hype, and they'll end up making mistakes. And a lot of those things are going to either have to be returned to more traditional platforms with the generative AI systems extracted out of them, or they need to be changed in some other way. That's because you were doing something for the wrong reasons. and not necessarily looking at the business value of something, but just looking at the ability to kind of leverage technology for technology's sake. And I'm seeing that in, like I said, I'm in meetings and things like that where people are saying generative AI 5 times as the answer for everything.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be the case. It never is going to be the case. And so my fear is that, and it's going to happen. People are going to make mistakes, just like they had with cloud. Everything was cloud. It's moving in the cloud this.
Yeah.
It was a good reason to move in the cloud, good reason to move to generative AI, but you have to really pick your battles carefully there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess everyone seems to race to be first instead of being right and answering that why, like you all were talking about earlier. So when it comes to Valerie had mentioned for you, David, in your last presentation, you said there are not too many people who know a little bit of everything in the tech world. Does generative AI impose on us the need for more architects? And if so, how?
Yeah, I always think we need more architects no matter what generative AI does or not, but because generative AI becomes another architectural pattern that we have to leverage and do so in the proper way. So I think it's a really good talent to have if people understand how to be an architect and they understand a little about a lot of stuff, and they're able to conform and configure technology in a way that's going to bring the most value back to the business. Generative AI becomes additive to that. So it's going to make things more complex. We have to think about how that stuff is going to fit in there. And it becomes more important to be an architect in light of these things, just because of the potential benefits that generative AI can bring, but also the harm that it can do if it's not used properly. So that's my take on that.
And, Valerie, you may know my take that the more technology exists, just like David says, the more we need architects, because we need someone to apply these new technology solutions to a business problem. Now, I do think it's damaging to certain engineering careers, not the elite engineers, never, because the best of the best engineers will always have a job. But if the engineers aren't as good as the AI, they're the ones that I think need to be concerned.
Yep.
Right. So Kevin says, what roadmap, and I'm guessing this was going to David, what roadmap would you give to an AI architect or someone wanting to specialize in AI and security? I'm guessing we're talking about learning or development roadmap here.
Yeah, I think an AI architect would be, just an architect that knows how to incorporate AI if it's a fit. I think that's the best way to do it. If someone shows up there an AI architect, red flags go off in my mind, because everything looks like a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. So they're always going to, hey, guess what? AI is the answer. And what about this? Oh, also AI. AI security would be a couple of choices there. Number one, we just talked about during the session with Mike that you're going to have to think about different dimensions of security, because suddenly data can be turned into a different state where you have to deal with it differently in security. So that's one thing, is dealing with AI, in this case, output data in light of security. But the other thing would be the ability to leverage AI within the security systems. Lots of security mechanisms right now are leveraging AI capabilities. That's been coming up for a long time. And so their ability to spot patterns and spot breach attempts and create defensive actions and carry things out is going to be a huge talent. So I would consider yourself an architect. I would consider yourself maybe a security specialist, one of those, but try not to put AI in front of everything.
And Kevin, it's interesting. If you know how I'm always biased towards the business, and the technology is just a tool.
Yeah.
For a really great architect, whether it be a cloud architect, enterprise architect, any architect, it's really going to be about, how do I fix the business? The tech, and for David and I, AI is, so now it's generative AI, but I promise you a couple of years later, there's going to be another technology we're going to be designing. Mm-hmm. And it's just like a carpenter that got a new hammer, just another tool.
Yeah, it's the innovation and the thought leadership of how you're going to apply it. That's the constant that you need, Kevin. Like these gentlemen said, you can innovate, you can, Stone Age tools all the way up to the tools that we use today. Who's behind the thought to actually create these tools, and how are they implementing them for the needs? That's what you should focus on.
So this next one comes from Rohan, and I believe it was when you were talking, David, about the about interviewing or about people that don't understand the technology and how it helps the business. I can't remember the exact context, but he came in with the question of, do you give scenarios or case studies of design architectures during interviews? Because he's trying to figure out, how do you gauge the skills?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm interviewing somebody for an architect job, it's going to be trying to figure out their problem solving capabilities is core to it. I'm not going to quiz them on what they know, the AWS knowledge and that kind of stuff, and play stump the chump with it. In other words, if you're building a particular system with these capabilities, how would you go about it? And you listen for things such as, I would understand the business, and I would understand where the information is coming from. I would understand the security parameters. I would understand the governance parameters, compliance. And then you get into the design and building of the meta architecture, and then the micro architecture, or physical and logical architecture, however they want to do it. It could be any number of ways of doing it, just so the fact that they're thinking through how a problem's going to be solved. If I hear, I would give the hyperscalers a call and see how they would solve it. That's not a solution. And that's what people say kind of 8 times out of 10, which would eliminate them from the job. They can certainly work other places, but they're not going to help me at all, because they're not going to get to solving the problem. They're just going to get to making the problem worse.
It's real talk.
Yeah, and there's a big difference, Rohan, between what is a BGP community. That's a memorized question that you can literally answer, versus I've got 3 equal cost ISPs to the internet. How do I load share without getting out of order packets? One assumes they understand networking, they understand subnetting, they understand BGP, they understand architecture, and then other one's a memorization. So it always has to be scenario based, because we're in a scenario world.
From Douglas, David mentioned processing data where it resides. Is data virtualization a solution for this? I recently learned about this concept from speaking with a vendor, Denoto. Can you touch more on this?
Yeah, that's a great point, Douglas. And it is. Got to remember, data virtualization has been around since the 90s. I wrote about it in my EAI book. There's a book behind me. And the cool thing is we can abstract physical databases to be any number of metadata exposures. So we can deal with very complex data sets and simplify them, and actually turn those data sets into ways in which we want to leverage them as a business entity. That's a complex way of saying we can take very complex, very heterogeneous data sets, different kinds of databases, different structures, things like that, and then make them look like a single set of information, which is organized in the way that we need it to be organized to consume it within, in this case, the generative AI systems, but it's for any number of reasons. So that technology has been out for a long period of time. It works fairly well. It used to be a big performance hit, and I had some security issues along with it, but it's 25 years old at this point. So you mentioned a vendor that has a solution, but lots of vendors out there provide data virtualization, data abstraction, and automation systems. And if you have very complex systems and you either can't change it, or it's uneconomically viable for you to change those backend systems, in most of the cases it is, then data virtualization is a way in which you can normalize those systems and make them a lot less simpler to deal with. So it's a good point you brought up.
All right. Khadijah says, what should a cloud security architect focus on as the organization adopts some new AI services into the IT system?
How to keep the organization secure. That's what a cloud security architect should focus on. How do I keep the company secure?
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail on the head. So you're there for security. The AI services really are not anything new. You have data there. You have different processes in place. You have output information. The only thing I would think of doing is what we mentioned during the discussion, is make sure we understand what that data is going to become, not just the source of the information, the different security parameters that operate around it. But I would deal with security with the same sort of methods and rigor you're dealing with security now.
Right.
So we need to focus on what doesn't change as well as what does change. And I think a lot of that stuff doesn't change.
That's a key point. I hear this from people that know, AKA Mike and David and others, and Mike knows where I'm going with this. Not much changes. It's the same stuff. It's just maybe a newer version of the same thing. It's like the football hasn't really changed in 100 years. Maybe the laces have gotten tighter. Maybe the pigskin is no longer pigskin, but it's still a football.
Meet the new boss. Same as the old boss.
Just a speed and what we can do.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about this one. I don't. What is the new role that developers will have with this architecture? Not sure if they mean with a generative AI in general being in the field now. Maybe that's what he's asking.
Yeah, the answer to that is it's pretty much the same role. You're just dealing with systems that are leveraging a new technology and are not a new technology, an evolved technology. So your architectural capabilities and the talent of you to solving the problem still remains to be seen. That's probably the most important thing you can bring to the problem right now. It's not going to change a ton, as we just discussed. It's going to change aspects and components that we have to deal with and make decisions upon, but it's not going to completely redo what we need to do as architects.
No. Not at all.
All right. And I like this one from Anakin Cloudwalker. What do you like most about being an architect?
Good one.
You want to take that, Mike?
Sure. I like helping companies and people with their systems. I like working with hospitals to make better healthcare. I like working with internet service providers to create better internet service. I like working with banks to help create better solutions so the bank can make more money and their customers can get a greater return. Or anywhere in between. But in all seriousness, Anakin, I like the business focus of it. I like that I no longer have to touch technology like I did in engineering days. You're not going to find me coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix something that's broken unless it's buying donuts. I like that, it's a give a presentation versus, write a line of code. I like, playing golf with clients. It's not too bad. It's not too bad getting, going to the Super Bowl and getting box seats, but it's not a challenge entertaining clients, but I like helping people. And whether I was practicing internal medicine or working as an architect, it's all about how do I help a business? How about you, David? And I actually like the conference piece too. I really love the people that I meet at all these conferences and things. I think it's fun.
Yeah, I like the problem-solving capability around it. So in other words, it's never going to be the same solution twice. So it's always going to be bespoke for the problem you're looking to solve. So it's never going to be boring. So you have to consider everything and come up with the best solution and configure that solution. And you're going to have more strategic benefits you're able to provide if you're able to get to the most optimized solution. So that comes back to the business. So therefore you have a tendency to be more appreciated because you brought real value back in a very short period of time. And that is truly working with business and technology, which I think is what it's all about. Your ability to kind of see the business and see how technology is transformed into solutions that make that business better. And it's a hugely satisfying to me. So I used to be a developer, building or, writing code and deploying systems. That's certainly fine. But I like dealing with the meta aspects of the technology in a much, because it provides you to have much more meaningful roles in configuring the technology for a particular business.
All right.
Oh, from Orlando. Will there come a time, and either one of you can tackle this first. Will there come a time when computer systems can repair themselves at the software level without human intervention?
Some of them already can. In fact, I've been working with networks that have been self-healing now for 25 years. So Kubernetes is somewhat self-healing. You've got a certain number of containers that are going to run. One goes down or crashes, another one's there. So we're partially there, and I think it's going to get a lot better. How about you, David?
Yeah, I mean, self-healing has been around as a concept for a long period of time, and certainly the operational aspects of it. And so they can fix things and apply updates and reboot computers and servers and do a lot of things before they have to alert a human being to come fix the software. I think generative AI is going to allow it to rewrite aspects of itself on the fly and do so in an automated way. We've been doing that for a while, but you have to do it a very structured way. It's going to provide us with better capabilities in making that happen. But so it's happening now. We're going to get better at it, and it's a good thing we're getting better at it. I hate chasing down tactical problems because of a bad driver or things like that. I mean, a problem the other day where I have a bad audio driver on my particular MacBook in my studio, and that was a problem. It took me an hour to figure out what the issue was. I wish that self-healed. That's an hour back I wish in my time. But it turned out to be a problem with, just applying the update and compatibility issue with the audio driver. And so the more we have that, the more we make computers usable for people, the more we kind of remove us from having to deal with the mundane aspects of it.
From Nate, can decision-making notation, aka DMN, business process management notation, MPMN, and unified modeling language, UML, be used to help document generative AI solutions across enterprises? That's a mouthful.
Nate, they could be, but more importantly, it's probably going to be done with some flowcharts and PowerPoint.
I just have to commend him on the use of both acronyms and the full verbiage there, because if he had just put the acronyms, I wouldn't have known what was going on. But I still don't know what's going on, but I at least know what these words are.
And if he was going to read a TOGAF document, they would talk about all this. But, there's tech companies that run on Excel spreadsheets, believe it or not. And I mean big, giant tech companies. I draw my pictures in PowerPoint and always have as an architect. And if it really mattered, I'd give it to a graphics person that would put them in Adobe InDesign and make them look really pretty, that we could put in the white papers that I released. But how about you, David? Do you use any of this, or guys use any of this?
Used to, don't now. It has a tendency to overcomplicate things, and people, certain notation and certain disciplines come along with it. I understand why they existed, so everybody could communicate using a single semantic plane and single approach to making that happen. But now it just adds more work to the process, because people have to understand what the hell you're talking about and how all this symbology kind of matches to something. So I'd rather you draw stick figures on a whiteboard than give me this stuff. And there's lots of tools out there that do that, and they're perfectly fine. But the reality is you can faster define what an architecture is, business process flow, just with a standard flow chart and he's right. PowerPoint, Mike's right. PowerPoint would be what I would go to.
And you wonder why we use PowerPoint in our classes.
Real easy.
It works. It's fast. We know it.
From Martin, looking to implement Copilot AI, what are the possible and advantages, pitfalls? Will this erode the role of developers?
I think Copilot's a great use case for generative AI, because it's able to, basically help you develop code and look over your shoulder as you augment code. So the advantage is it should make you more productive at the end of the day. The disadvantage would be a lot of people are relying too much on it, and it may be making inefficient code in some instances, and people need to understand how to spot that and get in there and fix it. One of the things that I don't want to see is very resource intensive systems that are poorly designed because they let the AI system design it and roll it out. So there still has to be a human interaction to make it happen. Will it erode the role of the developers? No, we've had code generators for a long time. No matter how capable this is, developers will still have to be there to figure out, to ask the right questions, to prompt to the autocoders in the world like Copilot, and get to a state, and also understand whether they're in a state that's going to be the correct answer for what we're looking to solve. So developers become even more important in that case, because now you have this big tool that you can probably screw things up pretty easily. And so you need not to do that. So developers will have the power to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I agree in principle. And I want to segment it between the best, the average, and the bottom. If generative AI is 70% good and the bottom people are 50% good, generative AI replaces them. The people at the top, that top 20 or 30%, are so good that you can't live without them no matter what. And that people
and their ability to know how to use this tool is just going to make them
better, and they'll be able to do the work of 20 people.
It's going to just widen that gap between the top and the bottom of everybody, people in these roles.
And the people in the center, that's going to be dependent upon how good they are at leveraging these tools and finding mistakes versus are they not better than the tools. So I definitely see it's great for the best. And I see the best of the best getting paid far more because now they can do 10 people's jobs. But I worry about the bottom 20 to 30%. Then again, after being in tech companies for years, the bottom 20 to 30%, you often, if you ask them what they do, you can't figure it out. You just can't find out. You can't even figure out what they're doing. And
Okay, so I got to move on to this next one because it's both fun and serious at the same time. So we all know Watson played Jeopardy, and that was a very long time ago that Watson played Jeopardy. But generative AI, what about AI playing poker? Is that something that generative AI could just, in theory, keep getting better and better and better?
Sure.
Me as a layman, I saw this question and I'm like, I wonder if I could utilize that to my advantage somehow to go to the
good poker players are able to understand patterns and likelihood of things occurring. Generative AI can certainly do that, probably better than human beings can. So there's a certain amount of strategy in that game. I'm not a poker player, so I couldn't do it, but there's no reason that it couldn't play poker and probably win at poker just because it's able to do things much faster and better than we can as humans. But that's the idea of playing a game. We're testing our intellect and testing our ability to play the game and our skills in playing the game. So if we're letting the AI system do it, that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I bet you it would be great at blackjack because I understand there's a.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I could. Blackjack is my thing. I can count, so I'm good with it. I can do blackjack.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be better at gaming, but the reason we play games is for the fun of it. I mean, it's like being in a running race and somebody's driving a motorcycle. So,
yeah. Here we go. From Chigazor, just for the sake of practice, going back to that idea of just for fun, I guess, that we were just talking about. I don't know. What tools do you suggest we could use to try out generative AI architecture? Will ChatGPT be good enough?
Yeah, I would use ChatGPT and the API as just kind of a jumping on point. So use how to interact with it, learn about what it's capable of doing, but also use the API to use it from applications. So that's just my take on it. Whenever I teach generative AI, whatever, ChatGPT is just the easiest one to use because for most people it's free. The API is fairly easy to use. It doesn't cost a lot. So just get yourself an API code and figure out how to call it from the application and give it a try.
Yeah, and I love using ChatGPT as well. A friend of mine who's on this call right now actually showed me he took all the Internet Engineering Task Force RFCs, trained a networking model on it, and boy, the content he showed me this weekend at our conference was really impressive.
It was.
All right. These next couple of questions make me feel like I'm back in college now. So here we go from Orlando. What role is ethics playing within AI as we move towards much more automated processes without affecting society itself?
I would love your take on that, Mike.
Well, there's no way that AI won't affect society,
Right.
regardless of what your ethical principles are. So, when it comes to ethics, I think we have to keep, there's the things like beneficence, do things that are good for society, keep away from any kind of malfeasance, which are things bad for society. But it's going to affect society.
Right.
And I don't know that it's a bad thing that it affects society. Now, I forget which magazine interviewed me, and they said, what do I think is going to happen with security? And I said, it's going to make phishing attempts much better. And they said, what do you mean? I said, most phishing attempts, the person's illiterate on the other end, you can see and spot issues. I said, but ChatGPT is pretty good, and I'm expecting better phishing attempts. Well, I got a PayPal notification the other day, and I read it, and this thing was so darn good that I had to start looking in the headers to actually see. So, I do see more sophisticated attacks coming from this.
Yeah, I think it's going to be weaponized for security things, as like Mike just said, and we're going to have a big problem in our hands in trying to defend ourselves from that. Because I've already seen those kind of attacks occurring now, even before the security systems are prepared to defend against them. So, but that's ethics on the bad actors part, someone who's, you know, weaponizing it to go after folks. As far as businesses go, there's always going to have to be ethical questions when you use technology, and this is no different. So how it's going to deal with biases, how it's going to deal with data, how you're going to have it make decisions, and all these sorts of things that kind of come down to asking yourself, you know, if you should do it, not how you can do it. And so that's where businesses are going to have to, you know, figure things out. A lot of stuff I find is going to be relatively obvious, but some businesses, certainly when they get into the profit motive aspect of it, they need to understand that there needs to be some control over how that occurs, and that they're limiting some of the capabilities uh, because it maybe have ethical questions behind it. I'd rather do the right thing than make money.
Absolutely.
All right. Continuing with my college feelings. How should intellectual property laws adapt to accommodate content generated by AI?
Well, it's all the tough ones. I mean, they're already having legal precedents for that because, like I said, generative AI gets their answers from someplace. I've even recognized my own stuff that I may have written, you know, 10 years ago will pop up, you know, as a response to an answer. And it was unique to the article that I wrote. So I'm not sure. I guess there's going to have to be some sort of guidelines that are put about, and some sort of legal precedents that remain. Because, and in many instances, I think people are going to train it with known data. They're not going to train it with data that is going to have some intellectual content issues. What do you think, Mike?
I completely agree. All in all, if it's trained with good data, if it's accessing information on the public internet, it's public information in the first place. So I don't have a problem with it. Kamal, I almost never think it's a matter of generating new laws. I think it's always a matter of enforcing the laws we actually have. There are laws for intellectual property. Now, whether they're followed or not is another story. But I don't think we need new laws. I think we've probably got a few thousand more laws than we probably need, and we don't follow any of them in the first place, which is the issue. Not that we need new laws.
We will see cases, though, where someone creates a novel invention based on some sort of use of a generative AI system to assist them in building that invention. And then suddenly they realize that it traces back to IP that trace back to a particular person, and then that invention will be in contention. So that could be poisoning the well, so to speak. And so businesses need to proceed with caution, or else these things are going to kill you in court. If you're using somebody else's idea and stuff and they can prove it, and you build something, you know, that costs you, say, $500 million to build, you know, so like a new drug you're taking to market, then you can end up losing the entire amount of money just because you made the mistake of leveraging a piece of IP that could have been innocuous to the actual solution you're looking to build.
I absolutely. Yeah. And part of that's going to be the reconnaissance that needs to be done before they go anywhere with it, kind of like you would do with a patent search.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a combination of that. And then I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing some similarities between the music industry.
It's already happening.
Right. But because the whole, all the fights about, that they copied my XYZ or my ABC, and all it was, it's just music. Like it's all melted into the same thing now. And I bet maybe not direct similarities, but again, for a layman like me, it's going to be like, oh, that sounds a lot like what they're, so-and-so wrote a song 50 years ago, and then somebody else came along, never heard that song, but they've heard 500 other songs that were inspired by that one. And then now we're back to something that sounds like that song. And
I think it'll happen.
Yeah.
And I think it'll get tested in the courts too.
Right, exactly. I think we'll probably see more case precedent than laws actually being implemented. Here we go. From Manny. What is the future of generative AI and the cloud architect? Will cloud architects still have jobs?
Come on, Manny.
Absolutely, Manny. More tech means more work for architects. Now we've got more things that we can use to help our businesses earn more money with, or cut their costs down, or maintain profitability, or do better for their clients, or whatever the case is that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it makes that role.
No, please go ahead, David.
No, it makes that role more important. Just so the architect's there to build the systems, including generative AI systems. So there's more complexity to it, and therefore we need good architects who are able to get us through that. And yes, they will still have jobs. I wrote a article in InfoWorld, I think a year and a half ago, and talking about, will generative AI replace architects? And the reality is that the conclusion is no, because you still need the creative aspect of it and the problem-solving systems, and those are still uniquely the domain of human beings.
From Robert, do you see any of the big companies, for example, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, have any particular advantages in the AI space today and down the road?
I don't see anybody who's head and shoulders above somebody else, and I think that time's going to have to tell a lot of these, at least in the generative AI aspect of it. They've been at it for a few years, and they're going to get better and better at it, but we're going to have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and to me, it's never about who has the best technology and who has the right technology to solve my business problem. And it could be these, it could be somebody else too.
Royko says, are you going to show AI examples? I think we talked quite a bit earlier about different examples of use cases for AI and how, yeah. So I would definitely recommend going back and watching from the beginning. You probably jumped in the middle of it, but once the replay's up, definitely go back and watch the beginning, or from the beginning, not just the beginning.
Victor. From Victor. Hello, David. What can you say about the security architecture we have in our cloud-based systems and architecture in contrast with what we have in traditional or on-prem system and architecture?
Well, a lot of them are very the same, but when you deal with cloud architecture, which whether it includes generative AI or not, you have to deal with different aspects of the fact that you're dealing with a public utility, and you're dealing with databases that you don't physically own. So therefore, they have to be treated a bit differently. Normally, the tools in the public cloud have a tendency to be better because that's where the amount of funding has occurred, and they have more innovation there, and they're spending more in R&D. But the architecture patterns are the same. But normally, also, you're dealing when you're cloud-based systems, you're going to have a multi-cloud and a hybrid cloud, and you're dealing with on-premise systems and cloud-based systems, and you're not going to be able to focus just on a particular platform. You need to focus on holistically how all these things are secured as a grouping of systems. So we're kind of out of that, where you can actually secure things as silos, not really solve a problem if you do that. But your security has to be holistic, that operates across platforms.
Yeah, and Victor, whether I design a demilitarized zone for a web app on AWS, Azure, Google, OpenStack, or a plain old-fashioned data center, it's the same thing that I'm going to design my demilitarized zone with. Nothing really changes. So, if we were all in a single cloud and 98% of people are multi-cloud or hybrid multi-cloud, then we could potentially use the cloud provider's tools. But given that we're multi-cloud, we have to use the same Palo Alto, Fortinet, Cisco, Checkpoint security tools that we always have. And in some cases, I think it's good. I mean, I would rather use a Checkpoint firewall or a Fortinet firewall than I would the AWS WAF, because it's next generation and it can do more. But, I will still say that, the data center in the cloud is probably more secure than the average data center because it's got newer and better tools. But if you've got an unlimited budget, you can obviously build a more secure private data center because it's not a shared system, and you can do anything you need, from admission control to QoS to hiring, ex-Navy SEALs, be armed on the roof, keeping people out. So, but all in all, I'd say, the cloud is generally better, but the architectures are the same. Any architecture you could do in the cloud, you could do to the data center. I almost don't even know if there's a difference between a cloud architect and a regular IT architect. Same virtual machine, same containers, same storage area networks.
I would argue there's not. And I think if someone just focuses on cloud, they're only missing half the picture. They have to be holistically prepared to deal with systems that run across very heterogeneous environments, cloud and not.
And I love that you said that, David. When we started 2 years ago, people said, why are you making me work with VMware? Why are you making me work with routers and hardcore VPN concentrators and all of that? I said, if you want to move this stuff to the cloud and you don't know what it is, how are you going to move anything? Plus, it's not all going to be on the cloud. These agile things should be on the cloud. Doesn't matter if it costs more. If it's more agile, it's still worth it. But things that don't need to be agile don't pay more.
Absolutely.
All right, so now we're getting to our two-part questions. Douglas says, today during one of our classes, the topic of envisioning the future with AI was discussed. A passing thought I had is how AI is capable of deriving meaning from data. While this has been achievable in the past, it can now be done more efficiently, quickly, and accurately. Do you think this will have security implications?
Yeah. I mean, you can derive meaning from data, but also it has a different state that need to be secured differently. We talked about when they had the discussion with Mike and I is that security becomes a bit more complex because AI has the power to derive meaning from data that can be a category of data that needs to be treated differently. I can take ambiguous data, out of a medical database, could be, petabytes of information, and I can derive PII information out of that data based on the fact the generative AI system is able to spot patterns and discern individuals and assign individuals to, certain diseases that they had and things like that. And suddenly you got a problem. So you need to kind of consider that in terms of you're changing the state of the data. So you're dealing with the data differently. I would say you probably have to deal with it all within zero trust, but it's something you have to keep an eye on because in many instances you may be violating the law by producing and storing that data. So that would be a security implication, legal implication, governance implication. So you have to be very careful. The power of generative AI can get you in trouble because of the kinds of things that it can derive from data that's normally unprotected.
Great points.
So Victor asks, what really are the dangers in generative AI? What are organizations doing to mitigate the risk in our enterprise? Then how secure are these systems being integrated with generative AI capabilities? Whoa, asking all the big questions there.
It's a three-pronged question right there. Who's going to tackle that one?
I'm out.
I'm trying to understand the question first, personally.
Yeah, me too. It's like then secured on these systems being integrated with generative AI capabilities. I guess he's under the pattern here is security and risk.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like we've kind of addressed that to a good extent several times.
We'll put this in ChatGTP and see what it comes up with.
All right. Let's see. What is it? Okay. And Teus says, David, regarding implementing AI within an architecture, with the mentality the first shall be last and the last shall be first, makes sense to avoid making business mistakes.
You can use whatever you need to use to avoid making business mistakes. And if that's, something that you use an analytical problem solving capability, by all means do it. But I wouldn't focus on that. I would focus on, dealing with the real world structure of requirements and, how you solve those requirements with different technologies. What's your take on this, Mike?
Well, I don't really understand the first shall be last, the last shall be first. So I would look at it this way. What problem do I have to solve? What do I need to do to get there in terms of people, processes, and technologies? And that's how we get to any solution.
Yeah, I think he's talking about going from something that's very specific to something that's very general, and then vice versa. Yeah. That's kind of my take on it. But
the way I interpreted it is, let me look at the end. What does the end look like, and how do I get there?
Insane. Okay.
That's how I read it, but it's not 100% certain. The good thing is, Antaeus, you know where to find us.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're in our program. Come ask us that with a little bit more context. We'll see if we can come up with something for you.
Yeah. Sit through ChatGPT and see what happens. I'm interested in kind of what it's got to say about that.
I got to do this. It's the end of the show, everybody. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I'm not going to say too much except I've really enjoyed listening to the conversation. In case it wasn't apparent, I still have to go finish my popcorn. But I want to thank David for joining us, and of course Mike for hosting. I'm gonna leave it at that. Alonzo, you got anything to say before we let David and Mike close it up?
Oh, I was hyped about round 2 for you gentlemen. It was great stuff. You know, peeling back the layers, you made it really plain, and really were able to tackle those 2 and 3 and 4 layer questions. you guys put in the work. I really am excited about what you guys have been doing, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. All right. So let's thank David in the chat box there. Yeah. Oh, there was a question earlier, and I'll let you answer this, David, and then I'll let you both close out with your thoughts. Somebody asked a while back where to find your books.
Amazon.
Okay. Perfect.
Where I got mine. Yeah.
I'm gonna take Alonzo and I off the screen and let you two close it out.
Kind of missed that old commercial where they'd say wherever great paperbacks are sold. I can't remember what commercial that was. You can
wherever fine books are sold. That's what they would say.
Yes, exactly. So, David, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our audience. It's more than appreciated. I really enjoyed doing this. I hope we do another one real soon on another topic that's pertinent in the technology industry space.
It's always great to be on your show, Mike. It's great talking. You know what you're doing, so that's very apparent. And always enjoy discussing this industry with you and where things are going.
So thanks so much, and I'll talk to you very soon. Take care, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Bye.